Welcome once again to another episode of Deep Dive, the official podcast of Nightdive Studios. We appreciate you tuning in for another episode, and we thank you for all the wonderful comments you've been leaving for us on the previous episodes. I am, of course, Demetrius, aka MVG, your host. Joining me once again are my co-hosts, Locke and Morgan. And today, members of the Nightdive development team who worked on a specific game we'll be talking to more about later on. And what game might that be? Well, here's a hint. Things are about to get ludicrous as we delve deeper into the development of Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition. Before we do, if you want to win a free code for Quake 2 Remastered, be sure to stick around until the very end of the episode for a question prompt that'll enter you for a chance to win. Now, with all that out of the way, let's dive right into our first segment. Rise of the Triad is a very special game for me that has a lot of nostalgia. When I was fresh out of college, my first ever job was working in a computer store building PCs back in 1995, and it was the first time I ever saw Rise of the Triad on a customer's machine. The game was such a step up from Wolfenstein, which by then had gotten a little bit dated, but for those that don't know, Rise of the Triad is a first-person shooter that sits somewhere between Wolfenstein 3D and Doom in terms of its tech. It uses a customized Wolf 3D engine, and the game came into the scene with so many cool announcements. It was fast, way faster than Doom. You could dual-wield pistols, pick up some insane weapons. There was an awesome dog mode, crazy power-ups, and the game had a impressive verticality to it, which really kind of flipped the script in lots of ways. There was a ton of levels, a really good multiplayer system, explosive weaponry, and the soundtrack is burned into my brain. I absolutely love it. When people say the term boomer shooter, Rise of the Triad for me is that game that defines that specific term. It's also a game that I have a lot of familiarity with from a software dev perspective, as I ported the game to the Commodore Amiga back in 2012, and it taught me a lot about software development, game mechanics, and 3D engines. It's a special game for me and one that I have fond memories of. And with all that out of the way, let's shoot over to Locke, where he has much more to tell us about Rise of the Triad.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Deep Dive. I am here with Lexi Mayfield, who was one of the brains behind Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition. Lexi, how are you doing?
Doing okay, yeah. Like you said, my name's Lexi Mayfield. I've been with Nightdive Studios for a couple of years now, and just happy to be here.
All right, so can you just give me a little background on your role in the project, as well as sort of how you became involved with it?
It came up during one of our stand-up meetings that Rise of the Triad was coming across our desk, and I kind of volunteered on the spot because that was one of those games. It's one of those games like Doom or Quake or one of those types of games where kid me would have loved to have worked on one of those projects and was fascinated with those games as a kid. And it's like, now that I'm at a place that remasters old games, that's one of those projects that's like, oh, that would be really neat to be able to work on that.
Cool.
So
yeah, juicy one. So what makes this game so special to you?
Well, I mean, I do think that it is a large part of it is actually nostalgia, because
that's fair.
When I was a kid, I was very much into the shareware scene of the mid '90s PC market, and I just remember loving to play the Apogee back catalog, the Epic Mega Games back catalog, all of those, and just random things that you would find on the internet or the early internet. And Rise of the Triad was one of those games I discovered. And it made such an impression on me because I had played Doom at that point, but Rise of the Triad seemed to me like it was the first time I could ever recall that I could actually get a sense of who the people were behind the game. They weren't just people names in the credits or anything. Right. You could read the Rise of the Triad FAQ and get an idea of, oh my gosh, there's all these clear in jokes to Office stuff, and who people are and they would just throw things in just for the heck of it, because hey, let's have a missile that splits into multiple other missiles. Let's have a baseball bat that you can charge up, because why not? We're just trying to cram as much cool stuff into one game as possible, and that
Totally.
really made an impression on me. Like it was one of those things. It's like, man, it would be really neat to be a game developer one day.
That's
So
cool. The next thing I wanted to go into was the a bit of the challenges with the code and what you had to do about that. So yeah, tell me about what roadblocks you hit or what challenges you had with trying to fix up this code for release.
so Rise of the Triad is running on a very much evolved version of the Wolfenstein 3D engine. I mean, the game was originally Wolfenstein 2 Rise of the Triad, but they just decided to. But when they couldn't get the rights to Wolfenstein for a sequel, they just
Rebranded it, yeah.
decided to call it Rise of the Triad. So this is a Wolfenstein engine. And so if you've ever worked on like Doom from a source port, and especially if you've worked on Rise of Wolfenstein 3D,
Mhm.
obviously, you'll see a lot of similarities, but also with all of the extra features that they had added to the code base, they were twisting this code into doing a lot of things that maybe the Wolfenstein 3D engine was never really designed to do. And so the code tended to crash a little bit more than one might have hoped. And also, we didn't and also the code was never was ported to a lot of places, like Doom. Within a year or two, Doom was on the Jaguar, then the Sega 32X, then later we got PlayStation
Mhm.
Doom,
Mhm.
Saturn Doom. We got all these other ports of Doom. Rise of the Triad never really got that, so all you really had was the DOS port, and then later on they did release the source code to it later on. The game was just never really designed to be played on a console, and so there was just a lot of code to go in and make accessible to a gamepad and make sure it didn't break with a gamepad. And also, there were some subsystems that just had to be replaced. I think the mainstream publications treated us pretty well, but it was really gratifying to see the real fans of Rise of the Triad enjoy what we had brought to the table so much, and just having new people who had maybe never played the game before, just having them hop in and experiencing the same. I mean, we're in 2023, 2024
Yeah.
these days, so it's not going to have the same effect, but maybe just help. That was kind of my goal. I wanted people to see what I saw in this game and
Yeah.
make sure that was kept front and center in this port. So
That's amazing.
it's so amazing, all of the extra stuff that we crammed into this project. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's sometimes I can't believe that we. Sometimes it's kind of unbelievable how much. I mean, because this game deserved it. This game was so underrated. It was compared to Doom. It was the kind of game that you would only know if you were really into the DOS shareware scene in the
Mhm.
'90s, and it really
Mhm.
did. I felt like it's spot in the limelight, and its accessibility especially is long overdue. I'm so glad we were able to bring this awesome game to modern audiences
Yeah,
and
I'm
old
so
fans.
yeah, absolutely. Like I like many others grew up in that shareware age, and to see it in this state is pretty unbelievable, and to have folks like you working on it with, coming from such a place of passion, and to do it such justice and add so much content in there, it's pretty amazing what you were able to do. So yeah, thank you again for your work on the game, and I wanted to thank you again just for coming and chatting and sharing your experience with the development of this thing. And yeah, I've just had such an awesome time chatting with you. So thank you again, Lexi.
No problem. Thank you so much for this conversation. Really
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Locke, and today I am joined by Daniel, who is one of the devs working on Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition. Thanks for joining me today, Daniel.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
Now you had a key role in getting Rise of the Triad across the finish line. Can you just give me a little bit of background on yourself, and then maybe what your role was in the project?
Sure. So I'm one of the KEX programmers on Nightdive. I joined around I think 3 years ago now. God, time flies. I had some experience. I've been programming for a long time, like 10 years or more, and I had some experience with retro games. Had my own old game projects like OpenXCom, kind of, as a hobby, doing the sort
Nice.
of thing Nightdive does, but as a hobby. And then I got pulled in 3 years ago for Quake, and then I just never stopped getting roped into every other project. So
And you say
for Rise of the
roped, but is it by choice?
No, yeah, yeah, I did expect it to last this long. It's been great. I've just been a little bit involved in every Nightdive project since then.
That's awesome. You've got quite a wide skill set. So yeah, so give me some perspective on what you were doing with Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition.
Usually in our projects, I'm more of a general programmer assistant. I help with uh, stuff that other people don't have time for getting it across the finish line, fixing all the bugs that show up at the last minute, features that need to go in. With Rise of the Triad, there was a lot of rush at the end, getting all
Mhm.
the lots of features by the end that we had to get tested, making sure all the new stuff for the players was all working, all the new options we added, especially stuff like getting the custom audio, custom music working right, level editor polished, making sure it was working good on Steam, on Workshop, on GOG, all those platforms, because that's the kind of stuff mostly community oriented stuff you can't really test a lot until you ship it. So we wanted to make sure that stuff was as good as possible so the community could go nuts with it.
Yeah, so what was the most challenging thing during Rise of the Triad?
I think one of the most challenging things is Rise of the Triad is a very unique game. Uh, like if you look at all the boomer shooters, Rise of the Triad is kind of like a very weird, bizarre. Like it's not doing a lot of weird things for its time. It's like originally it was Wolfenstein 3D2. Yeah, it's doing a lot of stuff it really shouldn't be getting away with it. And as we try to port it to more systems and make it extended and make it better, it's it was a real challenge making sure all the weirdness and quirks and stuff of the original still worked, while making sure it won't do something weird, would crash or something like for on all the new platforms. Like some bugs were features, some stuff the game would like show up a screen, like if a block would go off a level and stuff. And in the original game, it would just like quit out of the game when that happened. And we wanted to keep the silliness of the message. Hey, you did a silly block left level. There's a lot of silly levels even that they included, and we tried to keep all of that in, but making the game stay stable, not to kick the player out, stuff like that. That'd be very bad. And the code also uh, originally the game just they just made different builds of the game, like for the demo content, for shareware, final version and stuff. For our version, we had to pack all that into just the one game. You can't like be switching executables, restarting the game and stuff. So a lot of the code had to be restructured to make sure all of that worked, and it was very complicated. It was a very passionate project. Clearly, a lot of stuff just people really wanted to get in, stuff that either was cut from the game or just features that they thought was funny or cool or would add to the. Like Run is a very unique, silly game.
It's a goofy.
It's a
It's like
very
goofy Wolfenstein.
yeah, like most of our remasters, we try to polish it up, make
Yeah.
it look better, be better. Run is completely different. Like we kept it looking mostly the same, just did everything we could to bring up that weirdness even more, add more resolution, more features, more silly enemies,
Yep.
weapons, and new levels, that sort of stuff. So it was very different in that. I think working with New Blood helped us a lot because we had a lot more people contributing and adding stuff and back and forth and stuff.
Yeah, no, that's
So I think it
awesome.
was a very positive experience.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, one common thing throughout these conversations I've noticed is like no matter what the project, everyone's passionate about that. And I'm glad to hear that's the same case here with, New Blood coming in and sharing their ideas, and you guys at Nightdive being able to execute on them. So what a cool collaboration. What's your favorite weapon in Rise of the Triad?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd say favorite weapon either the what's called the drunk rocket launcher, I think it's
Yep.
called. That just fires missiles completely randomly.
Yep.
Very weirdly. I mean, they're all very fun. The other very fun thing, not really a weapon, but the dog mode is very fun as well. It's turning into a dog and going around killing everyone. I'd say those are my favorites.
That's cool. If the game had been released in 2024, what do you think it would have looked like or played like?
I think it would play more. I think you really have to. If it came out today, you'd still really, really want to focus on the weirdness, just with
Yeah.
more variety, more options and stuff. I'd say it'd be more like indie games like Ultra Kill or Cruelty Squad. I don't know if you're familiar
Yeah.
with those. That kind of really pushing out the limits. Like when it came out, it was weird, but not like really trying to go out of its way to be weird. It just kind of
Yeah.
happened. Like
Yeah,
originally it was
totally.
Wolfenstein. I'd say if it came out today, it should really like boomer shooters, and that's kind of pushing the style and being weird is a lot more common. So I would expect it to be a lot more out there, maybe really go crazy with the lore, the whole
Yeah.
backstory behind the weird cultists and stuff like that. Lots more crazy weapons and options, and you have the technology. You can have a lot more crazier weapons and effects and explosions and gibs, of course, ludicrous gibs.
Yeah.
So that's how I'd imagine it.
I love that. Great. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming and chatting with me about some of the ins and outs on Keck's development and Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition. So, again, thank you, Daniel, for joining me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was great talking.
Last episode, we asked the community about their favorite Star Wars characters. Here are some of our favorite answers and comments. First up, we have a comment from BZackman990 who correctly answered our giveaway question saying, Kyle Katarn's ship name was the Moldy Crow, but later in the games, it would be replaced by the Raven's Claw. I love what Nightdive is doing, you guys are awesome. And then from Dave Ruda, I always found that little pet rat of Jabba amusing, but really the favorite is probably the journey of Luke. Meanwhile, InQ Wheezy noted, I gifted Dark Forces to one of my good friends for his birthday, which was February 23rd. Ironically, he gifted Dark Forces to me for my birthday this year on June 9th. It's just the perfect birthday gift this year, it seems. For their favorite Star Wars character, Xbox Clown 8922 said, my favorite Star Wars character has always been Darth Vader. Despite virtually being trapped in a suit with life support, his unique skill set with menacing presence puts chills down your spines. I know people are funny with his origin story from the prequel movies, but Darth Vader is a great example of both potential and a prophecy getting warped. His surprising return to the light side prior to his death was a moment that always stayed in my mind. Derek Turtle Rowe also correctly identified Kyle's ship as the Moldy Crow and said, I would love to see more Star Wars games get remastered. Your work is amazing. My favorite Star Wars character is Qui-Gon Jinn from Star Wars 1. Something about Liam Neeson teaching Obi-Wan with good life advice and him being very caring is fantastic. Ichi the Killer also got the giveaway question correct and said, my favorite Star Wars character is probably the Legends timeline version of Luke. He developed really well during those games, comics, and books, becoming one of, if not the strongest Jedi of all time. And his dedication to the Jedi School and doing the right thing was always really wonderful and inspiring when I was a kid. And then finally, Gello Famer gave some love to Darth Maul, saying, my favorite Star Wars character is Darth Maul. I agree he didn't get his time to shine in the movies as much as he should have, but his reintroduction through the Clone Wars show was fantastic. Shout out to Sam Witwer for such an amazing performance as well. As we approach the end of the podcast, it's time to drop the question prompt that, when answered correctly, will give you the chance to win one of 5 giveaway codes for Quake 2 Remastered. Ready? Which industrial rock band composed the soundtrack for 1996's Quake? Leave a comment on YouTube or Twitter with the correct answer. We'll reply to the winner's comments with an email on where they can coordinate with us on receiving their code by August 12th. Did you get last week's question correct? Let's find out. The correct answer to the name of Kyle Katarn's ship in Star Wars Dark Forces Remaster is the Moldy Crow. Before we wrap up the episode, one last question. What's your favorite video game soundtrack? This one's really tough, so I'm just going to do what I did with my horror movie answer and list a bunch as quickly as I can. So first, shout out to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtrack for introducing me to so much great music when I was a kid. I will probably always think of that game when I hear Superman by Goldfinger. More recently, the soundtrack for Metal Hellsinger had a nice assortment of artists on it that I really liked. And speaking of metal, I of course have to say the soundtracks for Doom, like all of them, but especially 2016's Doom and 2020's Doom Eternal. As a guitar player, I just really love those soundtracks and the sound. Genre switch, but more recently, Final Fantasy 16 also wowed me with how exceptionally good the music is consistently throughout. A few more before I wrap up are Austin Wintory's soundtrack for Journey and Abzu, soundtracks from Darren Korb for games like Bastion, Transistor, and Hades, and the soundtracks for Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross. And now we turn the question over to you. What are some of your favorite video game soundtracks?
Now, my favorite video game soundtrack has to be Silent Hill 2, composed by the legend himself, Akira Yamaoka. His work is amazing, but Silent Hill 2 is something else altogether. Every track feels organic and fits the game perfectly at the right parts, and many psychological horror games kind of rely heavily on a soundtrack that's too jump scare or horror focused. Silent Hill 2 doesn't really do any of that at all. Listening to the tracks outside of the game is quite relaxing. If you take a walk or do anything leisurely, anything outside of playing the game itself really puts a lot of emotion into your mind. And it really perfectly captures the essence of the game. It sounds so hauntingly beautiful, and it really just adds to the immersion that you're there in Silent Hill, that you're playing as James. Akira Yamaoka is the master of his craft, and I love Silent Hill 2, the soundtrack, and I'm really excited to see what he has cooking up for the remake.
When it comes to video game soundtracks, much like Morgan, I have a hard time just picking one, so I'm going to throw out a bunch out there that I think are important, great, and mean a lot to me. So we have Dead Cells, Hollow Knight, FTL, Shovel Knight, Risk of Rain, Crypt of the Necrodancer, Hyper Light Drifter, Hotline Miami, Castle Crashers, Dicey Dungeons, and if I have to pick one, I'm going to go with my man Disaster Piece and his work on Fez. I think it's a really special album and really captures that mystical, strange, and curious energy of the game in that soundtrack. And yeah, favorite video game soundtrack is Fez.
And that's going to be all for this episode. Thanks to everyone who joined us, where we did take a close look at Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition. We look forward to hearing your thoughts about the game, this episode, your favorite game soundtracks in the comments below. Bye for now.